I'm Antranig, you can call me Anthony. So, who's familiar with this game? Fair few of you. So, for those of you who aren't familiar with Papers, Please, it kind of made a big splash when it came out. Large number of reasons. One of the reasons I'm going to assert as to just why this was so successful when it came out was because it came just after a United Nations paper titled Displacement, the New 21st Century Challenge. And the basic argument of that paper is that the world had reached like a massive crisis in regards to like refugees and just internationally displaced people. So, and then shortly after this came out, the Syrian refugee crisis really started to hit Europe. So, even though Lucas Pope, the guy who sort of created the game, although he contracted people and said it was a one-person game, the main game developer argued that, the game was a response to his experience going through border security. Really, at the time, in the back of his consciousness, there were a lot of debates regarding migration going around, and I would contend that influenced the creation of this game. So, the general way I'm approaching this is I focus on interactive narratives, so branching storylines, multiple endings, and my general argument here is that this game utilises multiple endings, choices, narrative memory, I'll explain what that is in a moment, in order to interface with larger public discourses surrounding migration, refugee rights, border control. And it does so in a very unique way, and I think it's sort of an indicator for like the direction that interactive narrative and video game storylines are taking as we see the way in which video games interface with public discourses. So let's just jump into it. So the general outline of how I'm going to approach this: first I'll introduce Papers, Please, for those who haven't played it. Then I'll talk about the Express Self, which I have arrogantly coined as a term. And then I'm going to do a bit of a textual analysis, if you can say that with games, where I'm going to look at a specific choice, and then I'm going to thematically connect it to one of the endings. Okay, so Papers, Please. In Papers, Please, you are a border security agent in the authoritarian fictional nation of Aristotska. Glory to Aristotska. You have to process a very, very, very large number of entrants into the nation of Aristotska. Each entrant has paperwork, and you have an increasingly Byzantine number of rules that you have to follow to figure out whether or not they're allowed in or not. Throughout the game, you get a lot of individual stories. So some people have bad paperwork, but, they're refugees. They have a sub-story. You don't want to turn them away, right? Other times, you need to use the border to catch international criminals. So it kind of looks at both sides of the border security debate in its choices and in its interactive narrative elements. One of my favourite elements of this game is the fact that you have a family to take care of, and guess what? You're not paid enough to look after them. So what do? Well, yeah, it's like life, isn't it? Well, one thing you can do is be an absolute bastard, right? Because you're paid for every successful, good entrance that you let through. And if you let through someone with bad paperwork, you're penalised. So you can just be a real dog's body, You can go, I'm only letting in the real applicants, no refugees, nothing, nah. That's one way to approach it. Even that won't really get you enough money. You can also engage in corruption. Hey, here's $100, let me through. You can do that. There's a lot of opportunities for corruption. One of my favourite things to do is to help out the terrorist group that wants to overthrow the country, and they give you money. Oh, great. All right. So there are three main good endings, right? My favourite ending is the revolution, where you help out the secret terrorist group, and you have to finish 4 out of 5 missions for them. So when we get to narrative memory, that's an example of narrative memory. There's an indicator in the game's code saying missions completed for EZIC, 1 of 5, 2 of 5, 3 of 5, 4 of 5, yes. And then once you've hit the 4 or 5 mark, a tick goes off from the code and you're able to access this ending. So that's one example of narrative memory. We'll get to that later. Another one is you just finish all the levels. You don't get arrested, you don't go bankrupt. You get well done, you're boring. That's the ending you get. And the ending I'm going to focus on is called Snowier Pastures, and we'll get to that as well. The main theme of all these endings, and this is what shows a marked change in the way interactive narrative is employed in video game narratives, is that there's no real hierarchy between the endings. There's no, well, here's the good ending. Congratulations, you collected all the eggs, you get the good ending. And here's the bad ending, you played a bad person. It doesn't take that approach. It instead goes, well, look, you've won, you beat the game, well done, but it says, okay, but. And that's a really new approach in interactive narrative. It's a new approach in video game narratives that you're seeing in other texts, not just in papers, please. And that's where open literacy comes in, because these invariably start to interact with broader discourses. All right, so now I'm going to talk about the express self. So this is a term I've come up with. If you think it's a dumb name, please tell me. The inspiration for this came from a book called More Than a Game by a guy called Barry Atkins. And in it, he makes a sort of offhand observation that, well, when you are engaging in an interactive text, what makes that interesting is that it can see you. If you make a choice, if you turn to a particular page because of a diegetic choice, it can see you. It can encode what you are doing. Either, if you've ever played one of those fighting fantasy books, you could write down how much money you have. It can encode it into that, or it can save what you do as code and create a body of you through that code that it can see and it can respond to. And he invokes a bit of Lacan. I'm not going to touch Lacan, that's okay. He invokes a bit of Lacan here because it means you're being looked at by effectively an inanimate object, and that generates its own anxieties. So I thought, sweet, let's work on that. And I tried to research it a bit, and there's a bit of a literature review of different authors looking at what Miguel Saikat calls the second self. Grant Taverner calls it the fictive self, but all of it follows the same trend, whereas when you interact with a text or with a game, something emerges that isn't quite you, but is connected to you. Saikat looks at it as a sort of Foucauldian power relationship. The power relationship creates a subject, and he calls it the gamer. Grant Taverner looks at it as a sort of personal narrative that the player makes about their avatar as different game states are saved and attached to that avatar. Mary Law Ryan, which I'm going to get to later, she talks about narrative memory. Orseth looks at the character as a sort of, he doesn't use the word unstable signifier, but he means unstable signifier. Game events can save onto the avatar, which can have significance for the narrative and vice versa. Wolfgang Iser talks about the implied reader, which is a reader response theory idea, where something is implied in a text. There is a receiver who can receive the meanings latent in the text. And that's a sort of textual function implied by a text. So all of these, they're disparate ideas, they're not 100% connected, but they all refer to something which emerges through interaction, a distinct body, a distinct self, framed by the power of the text. So I'm jumping off of that to talk about the express self. So this is a choose your own adventure novel. In a choose your own adventure novel, the story branches off. And this is just another way of showing this. But each choice can be encoded as a number. And then you can get a string of numbers to show all the choices that you made in the choose your own adventure. So if, let's just say, meeting the elephant lady requires you to be a real bastard, well then the author of this particular choose your own might go, well, this guy's the person who got this, the implied reader is someone who has chosen lying options. I'm going to respond to them accordingly. Now, obviously, contemporary video game narrators can't do that. It's too expensive. So Mary Law Ryan, as she goes through the different forms of interactive narratives, she talks about the flowchart. And a lot of, if you look at like the Twine, all the Twine authors online, they also talk about this, although they use different words for it. So the flowchart gives player choices, but then reabsorbs it back into a largely linear narrative. And the way in which they give those choices meaning is that they save it into code, either as a faction system. This faction likes you just a little bit more because of what you did. Maybe a certain character likes you. Maybe you get more money. And then at the very end, it gets all of the narrative memory. That's the phrase she uses, and it calculates an ending based on your code. So I'm arguing that the express self is akin to the narrative memory that emerges through your choices as a sort of semi-phenomenological experience. It's how you've expressed yourself, and it is your self-expression within the game event that the machine sees and responds to. An obvious criticism of this idea is that people don't necessarily choose as themselves and they don't necessarily identify with the thing that they are playing as. This is a brief review that I'm not going to go into of empirical studies which say, yeah, largely when people choose as themselves and copy their own moral code, they kind of do that. They do identify as their avatar and they do largely play as themselves. Okay, so papers please. So in the Antigrian husband and wife event, which is probably the most cited event in this game, a husband comes by, he says, I'm free of Antigrian tyranny, yes, my wife is just behind me, and he goes through because he's got the right paperwork. The wife comes, oh no, she's got the wrong paperwork, what do you do? So Miguel Sarian refers to this as a wicked choice. Either way is fine. There's a trade-off regardless of what choice you make. You need to figure out which way you're going to handle this. Now, there are many events like this, and let's say you consistently choose to turn away refugees and engage in corruption. Well, this allows you to get lots of money, and you can use that money to then steal passports from people, which you can do. You can steal passports and then pay someone to forge them, which requires a lot of money, which requires you to turn away a lot of refugees and engage in a lot of petty corruption. But if you do that, you unlock this ending, the Snowier Pastures ending. And what I love about this ending is it's all about the okay but. It's a good ending. You've won. You get the victory tune at the end, but it's criticizing you as it does that. So after fulfilling the prerequisite goals to unlock this ending, the player and their family board a train to Obristan with forged passports. They are provided with an image of an Obristan security guard standing behind his security booth, a mirrored reversal of the normal position of power that the player occupied throughout the game. So there is looking down at you, there you're looking down at them. Now it's the player, the one who is vulnerable, with the story of seeking refuge from danger and bearing forged documentation. The ending sequence then provides the player with the following dialogue as they attempt to cross the border into Obristan. Everything about this, the positioning, the mirroring, how they're looking at you, is an ironic mirroring of the player's own formal position as a powerful and callous border security guard. Much of the scene's dialogue and exposition is designed to elicit retrospective empathy for the many travellers that the player had turned away. The exposition, the dialogue, the process, the boarding are all designed to mimic the unbearable tension and anxiety the applicants to the player's own border had to endure as the player applied the same mechanistic approach to them. I do not care why you come, wait here echoes the player's own cold and uninterested response that they had approached other players with, albeit with a different outcome. So here, the game has taken the player's expressed self, how they have expressed themselves, and is showing it back to them in a different context as an implicit criticism of their behaviour. They've given one standard of behaviour and now they're expecting another. It's particularly important that the player wins this. This is a victory. They get the victory tune at the end of it. And that's what's important here. If they had lost, if it said game over, the player could just rationalise this as a bad outcome and try again. But no, the player rewards them, but then it tells them but. It gives them a bit of criticism at the end that's this divorce from the ludic dimensions of the experience. So what's significant here is that interactive narrative, multiple endings, branching pathways, and narrative memory systems are all being used by games with interactive narratives to interface with larger discussions surrounding migration, refugee rights, and border control. Although the game on the surface appears to be largely pro-refugee because it depicts you as being an authoritarian jerk, it's worth noting that the other side is also giving credence. You know, you're also criticised for siding with Ezek in different subtle ways, but you're still criticised. There are also events where the player must use their border crossing to, for example, catch criminals. So all of the endings criticise the player to some extent. Here, Papers, Please works to add ambiguity to the player's pre-existing biases regarding border control without fully attacking their beliefs. It says, okay, but. And, you know, as we enter into climate change, border security isn't going away. Neither is this game. But also, neither is the fact that as these issues amplify, games are going to be produced which try and interface with these discourses in various ambiguous ways. And that's what's important. Thank you very much.